This is certainly a fascinating time. There are fractures all around our world, real questions about the global order that we've come to know, and America's role in that, its central role in that. Just ahead of the State of the Union, I spoke to Heather Nauert, who is the spokesperson for the US State Department. Heather Nauert, thank you so much for giving us your time on what is obviously a very busy day in the United States. State of the Union is traditionally a time when we look to the US President for guidance about America's place in the world. And this year we're wondering, does America first mean America retreat?
Yeah, well, America first does not mean America alone. Australia, perhaps better than any other country, knows the importance of global leadership, and we've certainly done that in our de-ISIS campaign. Australia, a strong partner of the United States and 73 other countries and entities in taking the effort to defeat ISIS in Syria and Iraq. That's just one example of U.S. leadership. The U.S. has also been very passionate in supporting democracy in Venezuela, where we have seen so much humanitarian suffering. Back closer to your part of the world, we've taken a leadership effort in support of Rohingya refugees who've been forced out of Burma, out of Myanmar, and into Bangladesh. So we've provided a lot of humanitarian support. I recently traveled there myself. So those are just a few examples of American leadership. And then another one, which is our top national security priority, and that is pushing for efforts to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. That's something that Australia and the United States and many other nations around the world support. That's our maximum pressure campaign, in which we put pressure, along with many other countries, to choke off the money supply that goes into North Korea. That money, by the way, does not go to the North Korean people. That goes to its illegal nuclear and ballistic missile program. So we want to starve off that money from North Korea. We're leading that charge.
I want to question that a little, because of course we have seen under Donald Trump the United States withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Other countries have now gone ahead with that. Also pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. There's been criticism of NATO and criticism of allies for not pulling their weight. How does that reassure the world?
So let me start with NATO, for example. The United States has made a really strong push for other countries around the world to put in 2% of gross domestic product into its military budget, if you will. And we've been able to get many countries around the world to start doing that. So that's an example of global leadership. You talk about trade. The United States and Australia have had a strong trade partnership since at least 2005. Under this administration, we believe that we can negotiate sometimes better deals for American workers and for American companies when we negotiate directly with some other countries. And so that's an effort that this administration is looking to do.
Now, of course, there are so many fronts that the United States is involved in, and we want to drill down on some of those. I'll start with China. How does the United States view the rise of China, particularly the emerging tensions in the South China Sea?
South China Sea is something that we watch very carefully. I work for Secretary Tillerson here at the U.S. State Department. We have many ongoing conversations with the Chinese government. We hosted 4 strategic dialogues with China in 2017 alone. We have a good relationship with China, but China, just like with Russia, when we have issues with a country, we will take issue with those countries, and we will have conversations about that. South China Sea is something that we watch very carefully.
You mentioned Russia. With the Mueller investigation continuing, is there not a chance that that compromises the United States in its relationship with a country that can be a provocative presence in the world?
Yeah, we certainly have seen a lot of Russia's provocative moves, both in our election, in our domestic election back in 2016. We know that they've been meddling in other countries' elections. We hold Russia to account with that, primarily through sanctions, but then also through words. We're not afraid to call out Russia for some of its malign activities. We've been a leader in doing that. We've watched what Russia has done in Ukraine. We've watched and we've called them out on that. We've remained very concerned about that issue in Ukraine and support Ukrainian territorial sovereignty. So we have a complicated relationship, certainly with Russia. Our Secretary Tillerson has said that it is at a low point right now, but we also have some areas of cooperation. For example, and this is something that doesn't get a lot of international coverage, but there's a ceasefire that is held in southwestern Syria that's held since at least last summer. So that is a good thing, because when you can find some areas of mutual cooperation, as we can have in some instances with Russia, particularly when it comes to ISIS, that is certainly a good thing. We look for more areas where we can cooperate mutually, but we certainly have other areas where we're not always seeing eye to eye, and we'll call them out on that. Human rights would be another example of that.
But of course, that investigation is continuing. We don't know just how far that goes up the chain in the White House. So does that not put a cloud over America and Russia?
Well, I work here for the U.S. State Department. I'm not over at the White House, so I can't answer all of those questions for you. Of course, it is something that runs in the headlines of some U.S. newspapers and on television programs, but there's an investigation underway, so I'm not going to get ahead of that investigation or be able to comment on that. We'll wait for our U.S. legal system to work that out.
Let's turn now to North Korea. We've heard before from the president that the era of strategic patience is over. But it's also a reality, isn't it, that North Korea is now a nuclear-armed state. What feasibly can the US do about that?
We are not going to recognize North Korea as a nuclear-armed state. And here's part of the reason why. They want that international legitimacy. It's an international legitimacy that the United States government will refuse to give them. And that's not just the policy of the U.S. government, but many other countries as well. We've seen at least 3 unanimous UN Security Council resolutions cracking down on North Korea for its activities in support of its nuclear programs and also ballistic missile programs. And we are in alignment with many other nations, including China and Russia, who have supported those successive UN Security Council resolutions. So we work together with many countries around the world. Australia just took part in the strategic dialogue, or pardon me, the ministerial that was held in Vancouver. We want to thank the folks from your country for participating in that. You are a part of the maximum pressure campaign, and so we will continue to push forward with that. With regard to North Korea, diplomacy is our preferred approach. Even our U.S. military will give you that very same answer. We want to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, and we will keep pushing ahead with that.
Well, if all options are on the table, does that mean military options?
Yeah, look, military options are always on the table, but that is not our first and foremost option. Our first priority is always diplomacy, but diplomacy also has to be backed by a credible military option. That is always there, but we want denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and along with our global community, we'll keep pushing ahead with that.
The war in Afghanistan is into its 3rd president now, and we're still seeing the Taliban able to strike even in the heart of the capital, Kabul. Do we have to accept the reality that this is not just a war without end, it may be a war lost?
Well, the United States, at least under this administration, has said that we would obviously like peace in Afghanistan. Australia has been a big part of U.S. efforts and other countries' efforts in trying to bring peace to Afghanistan and contributing forces from Australia. And we want to continue to thank you for doing that. Such an important thing. 16 years. There has been a war going on in Afghanistan, and we have seen the horrors that have taken place on the part of the Taliban over the last week. More than 100 people dead in various terrorist activities. We support peace in Afghanistan, but we recognize that it has to be Afghan-led peace process. The U.S. will help out. Just based on what has happened the last week alone, it looks like the Taliban is not ready for that. The long-term approach for Afghanistan, we don't view as being a military approach. Ultimately, it'll have to be a political process that brings peace to Afghanistan. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like they're ready for that just yet, but we continue to have support on the ground on the part of our U.S. forces and many others as well.
I want to turn to Israel and, of course, that decision by the United States to recognise Jerusalem as the capital. It's been seen as provocative. It's angered some, welcomed by others, it's fair to say. But where does that leave hopes for a 2-state solution between the Palestinians and the Israelis?
Well, here's one thing that this administration has said. We support a 2-state solution if the parties can agree upon it. And that means that the Israelis and the Palestinians have to both be willing to sit down and have negotiations where they'll both have to give a bit on this. They will both have to give. We are not saying it's going to be easy, but we support a 2-state solution if the two sides will agree to it. So we're not determining what the outcome must be, they have to be the ones to decide. So we're hopeful in that. The president has put a big priority on trying to bring peace to the Middle East, as have many other administrations. Look, longer than you and I have been alive, there has been strife and turmoil in this part of the world. We'd like to bring peace, but recognize that both sides have to be willing to sit down and talk about it.
Well, you've talked about the relationship with Australia. I want to deal specifically with that now. It didn't get off to the best of starts with that tense conversation between Donald Trump and our Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull over the refugee deal. How would you characterise that relationship now?
Oh, gosh, I would say our relationship with Australia is strong. I mean, certainly countries can have little disagreements over things, but we have such a system of shared values, a shared vision, not just for your region of the world or our region of the world, but the entire world as well. We remain strong, steadfast allies of Australia. Please know that we stand with you.
What are the obligations, the expectations of Australia in this relationship?
Well, I think the expectations are just as close as any strong ally. The president has spent time in the region. You know, the president went on that unprecedented 12-day trip to Asia. Secretary Tillerson, who I work for, spent some time in Australia. Our Vice President, Mike Pence, spent time in Australia this year as well. And we know we had a good meeting with your Prime Minister. I had the opportunity to meet Julie Bishop when she was in New York for the UN Security Council. So our relationship, I would say, is strong as ever. Well,
Australia, of course, is in a unique position. Its biggest trading partner is China. Its closest strategic relationship is the United States. How does the US view that? How do we manage that sometimes difficult relationship?
Well, I think very different types of countries, China and Australia. Australia is a democracy. Australia, we have a strong bond with. Now, China, we have a different type of relationship. We have areas of disagreement with China, and we talk to them about that, and we have forceful conversations about those things, such as media freedom, internet freedom, human rights. We have lots of those conversations with China. Those are not issues that we face with Australia, so the conversations and the countries are very different.
There is a view, and it's often expressed here, that at some point Australia may have to choose the US or China.
You know, I think that's a question for the Australians. I can't imagine that Australia would want to choose one over the other. I think the countries have to work together.
Heather Nauert, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.